And I'm so excited that, Monmouth asked me to do this. So thank you so much, Jordan. Before I begin, I just want to remind folks that without Monmouth, I would not be where I am today. I had Dr. Ira Smolinski as my advisor from freshman year on, and he really set the course for where my life has gone. And his loss, I still feel quite a bit. And I'm very grateful to him and so many other professors and faculty who really helped me sort of shape my, I was allowed to make up my own major. I was allowed to do lots of things. I did, off campus, an off campus semester. I was given a lot of freedom, but also a lot of structure and a lot of mentorship. I also want to give a shout out to Barry McNamara, who, when he was the editor at the Daily Review Atlas, took a chance on me and hired me as an intern, and really, again, helped shape where my career went. So I have so many people that I'm grateful to at Monmouth, and so many friends that have remained lifelong friends as well. I just want to start off by giving you a little bit of background on my organization that I co-founded called Food Tank. And then I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've seen in the food and agriculture sector since COVID-19 began. Let me just figure out how to use this PowerPoint. So Food Tank's mission, we started in 2013, is to really highlight stories of hope and success in the food system, both internationally and domestically. I came from an environmental organization in Washington, D.C., where I went right after graduate school. I went from Peace Corps to graduate school at Tufts University, their school of, the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy, and really focused on communication and really a lot of research around the state of food and nutrition worldwide. So with Food Tank, I was able to take that work and the work that I did in an environmental organization and really amplify it. What we try to do is give a voice to a lot of the organizations and individuals around the world who are working to fix the food system and better the food system in different ways by making it more environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable. And the way we do this is through a really robust news website. We publish original content daily, twice a day, 365 days a year. A big part of our work has been convening folks with different viewpoints to have what we like to call uncomfortable conversations. We've had food justice advocates at our summits, which bring 1,000 people together in person and are viewed by about 90,000 people worldwide. We've had food justice advocates on the same stage as agrochemical experts, really trying to bring different voices together and to reach some common ground and to develop what we like to call uncommon collaborations. We don't try to get people to agree, but we try to reach that common ground so that we can talk about these issues in a really civil way. We think a lot of civility has been lost when we talk about food and agriculture. People are on one side or the other. So we try to bridge those differences and talk more about the gray areas rather than making everything black and white. And again, we realize that folks are not always going to agree, but again, it's really important to have that dialogue and that conversation. Since the lockdown began with COVID-19, my coping mechanism has been really to listen. I've traveled this point to 70 plus countries across the globe. I'm usually in the field. Literally, I go and talk to farmers all over the world. I'm in laboratories talking to agricultural scientists and climate experts. I travel a lot. And so again, to sort of get through the last several months, I've been listening to experts, on video conference, and we've been highlighting their stories with daily live casts since COVID-19 began to talk about how the pandemic is really transforming the food system in different ways. And from the experts that we've talked to, it's clear that in a lot of ways, the food system and agriculture needed to be revolutionized pre-pandemic. And there's a sense that we can't return completely to the way things were. We're seeing a lot of unprecedented challenges unfold as a result of both COVID-19 and systemic racism. But we also think there's enormous opportunities to create a food system that's really resilient, a food system that can't be broken, one that is really truly restorative and regenerative, and that leaves no one behind. So the first thing I want to talk about is the role of technology. In the slide that I'm showing, one of the things that we're very interested in is the combination of high and low tech. And I've been really impressed by how farmers and eaters and businesses and other stakeholders in the food system have really pivoted their operations since the pandemic began. As restaurants and farmers markets closed, a lot of farmers were left without outlets to sell their produce. But digital technology, a lot of farmers have been able to set up their own online marketplaces and platforms. We've talked to farmers markets in places like in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Mill City Farmers Market has been able to set up an online store for customers, to choose products from individual farms and then pick them up in a really easy way, where there's no contact. These drive-through markets, have evolved since March when it was much colder in places like Minnesota. People are now able to interact, safely at a distance and pick up their produce, with their bikes or, just by walking. My own farmers market in Baltimore, where I live, has, instituted touchless pay systems. So keeping buyers and sellers at a really healthy distance while also allowing that interaction that, we all crave right now, and especially from farmers markets, which are usually very interactive places. I've talked to organizations like the Young Farmers Coalition, the National Young Farmers Coalition, the Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming, and they, like we're doing now, have used Zoom meetings and WebEx and, StreamYard to provide advice on food safety, help farmers set up those online marketplaces, help them, figure out how to get loans and other things to help them get through the pandemic. Old-fashioned phone trees have been set up so that farmers can check in on one another or organize trips to the city to go to market. One thing that makes me feel really hopeful is there's been a lot of interaction, especially in the Northeast, between younger and new farmers and older farmers who are trying to help one another, again, like driving products into the city so that younger farmers are doing that so older farmers aren't exposed to the virus. For those who rely on SNAP or food stamp benefits, organizations like Wholesome Wave are doing some incredible things with technology to make it easy for those clients of SNAP to order food online, just like more wealthy customers can. Ordering food via Instacart or from grocery stores directly. And I think pandemic or not, allowing SNAP recipients to get healthy food more easily, that's going to be a great benefit and really a game changer, especially for parents who are taking care of young children, or for the elderly when it's often hard for them to leave their houses. It's also been really exciting to see the growth of hydroponics and aquaponics during this time. Companies like Aero Farms in New Jersey and Gotham Greens in New York are growing produce and in cities using nutrient-rich systems that don't require soil to make sure that fresh, healthy produce is available year-round to folks in urban areas, sort of reducing that distance that food often has to travel from the farm to consumer. In addition, Food Tank is now leading what is called the Refresh Working Group with Google. And this is a group that brings together farmers, a lot of farmers from the Midwest, entrepreneurs, obviously technology companies, innovators, academics, and advocates to discuss the challenges and opportunities that technology in the food system present. Technology is not a silver bullet, of course, but it can help both producers and eaters really navigate this uncertain time that we're in and develop new tools and strategies for better access and affordability, as well as improving both urban and rural agriculture. The second thing that I want to talk about is really how important during this time it's been to make the invisible more visible to a lot of us. It's no secret that harvesting, slaughtering, processing, preparing, distributing, selling, and cooking food are putting lives at risk during this time. the essentialness of essential workers can no longer be denied. But we also can't ignore the unfair and unjust labor practices and low wages that make a lot of these folks very vulnerable in the workplace. Saru Jayaraman is a woman who started what is the organization that is called One Fair Wage. And she told me during an interview a few months ago that when the restaurant industry reemerges, it can actually take care of its people and allow both employers and workers to thrive. And she thinks that will mean better salaries, including a $15 minimum wage and universal unemployment insurance. A lot of restaurant workers, as we all know, have really been struggling during this time and have had to seek unemployment benefits and even are resorting to food banks and other places because they simply, there's no work available to them. Saru's work has long focused on these folks who are literally behind the kitchen door. Servers, cooks, wait staff, and others who, because of their immigration status or the color of their skin, routinely face discrimination, harassment, including sexual harassment, and other forms of abuse. Again, millions of these folks are now out of jobs. And because some of them are making such low wages because they relied on tips, they don't qualify for unemployment. And a lot of them, again, don't want to expose their immigration status for fear of being deported. So these are real issues that I think can no longer be ignored as we work on figuring out how to recover from the pandemic. Eaters can no longer ignore farm workers as well. Their ability to maintain health and be safe in fields ensures that all of us as eaters are safe. So whether they're picking tomatoes in Florida, cucumbers in Idaho, or cucumbers in Ohio, potatoes in Idaho, or organic lettuce in California, they need protections that often come through organizing and collective action. I spoke to Baltimore Velasquez, who is the head of the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, and he emphasized that, during this time, farmers and eaters and workers really have to work together to make sure that there are protections for farm workers and to make sure, again, that, they're healthy so that we all can be healthy. The next thing that I want to talk about is this idea of food as medicine, which has really been gaining a lot of traction since COVID-19. According to the Centers for Disease Control, people with diet-related illnesses, things like diabetes, obesity, hypertension, are at risk for more severe COVID-19 infections. And Black, Indigenous, people of color in communities across the United States have really been devastated by the infection, with both high rates of infection from COVID-19 as well as mortality. The former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman, told me that he believes our diets can really help flatten the curve of COVID-19. He says that what you eat has a lot to do with how healthy you are. And he says that eating plenty of fruits and vegetables and getting enough things like zinc and vitamin D can really help ward off disease. But he emphasizes that we need farm diversity in order for that to happen. He said farmers need a lot more flexibility to grow fruits and vegetables rather than a lot of the monoculture crops that they're growing. And we'll certainly need to continue growing those things as well, but we do need more diversity on farms if we want folks to be healthy, have access, to healthy food at a really affordable price. A lot of that diversity can come from smaller or medium-sized farms and more farms in urban areas. One is that I know pretty well is Rise and Root Farm in the Bronx of New York, and it was started by Karen Washington, and she's used that farm to not only feed folks in her community, but also empower young Black people and members of the LGBTQ+ community by teaching leadership skills, providing job opportunities, and a lot of mentorship. In a similar way, Tony Hillary has started Harlem Grown, which is working to feed homeless students and their families healthy, delicious meals that come from still running school gardens that Tony and his team have maintained throughout COVID-19. That leads me to talk a little bit about the school shutdowns. Elementary, high school, even college kids have been kept out of school. And for a lot of young students, that means that they go hungry. There are a lot of children around the world who depend on school meal programs. for, often their only meal per day. The World Food Program estimates that 360 million kids across the world have lost access to these school meal programs. And I recently spoke to Devin Clattel from the Rockefeller Foundation and Katie Wilson of the Urban School Food Alliance, and they talked about how when schools closed, cafeterias at the schools didn't have to remain open, but many did to continue distributing food and really changing distribution models for school meals. School cafeterias are still serving meals curbside. Many are providing a week's worth of food at a time to families, not just one student, but many students and their families, so that they have food throughout the week. And schools, what's surprising to me is that they're doing this without the promise of reimbursement from the federal government, but they're continuing to do it anyway, which, in my opinion, is very heroic. Devin from Rockefeller said that the hard truth is that while many of us thought kids could be saved from the health impacts of COVID-19, now so many are at risk for food insecurity. And she says that while philanthropy can provide resources over the short term, the federal, state, and city governments will also need to step up their efforts to help nonprofits and show these schools that they are supported. I think the final thing I want to talk about is really expanding the idea of what resilience means. In January, which now seems like a million years ago to me, Food Tank held a summit in partnership with the Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems at Arizona State University. And it focused on the theme of the wisdom of indigenous foodways and the need for listening to native voices in the food system. The room was filled at ASU with about 400 folks from tribes and native communities from all across North America, as well as Hawaii. And it was so inspiring to see all these folks together. And one reason for that is that conversations around indigenous food systems frequently feature rampant poverty, obesity, impoverished conditions on reservations, and lack of food access. And while all of those stories are very true, these conversations often overshadow the incredible success stories that are happening. The summit that we had was really about elevating those positive stories and figuring out what we can all learn from those communities. Former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, Kathleen Merrigan, said that diversity is lacking a lot of our food system work, If we're going to change the way we do food in this country, we need to change faces around the decision makers so that they reflect the real demographics of this country. And I think those words have never been more true. COVID-19 has exposed a lot of cracks in our food and our economic systems. And, I think that we have a real opportunity and a responsibility to reset post-pandemic. To fight the pandemic now and improve the food system and social justice, we need to reimagine in a lot of ways how we grow and how we eat food, and really how we mobilize for change. Our resilience is dependent on finding ways to promote, create, and maintain equality and fight against racism and discrimination. The uprisings that have happened over the summer across the country and across the globe, calling for an end to systemic racism, are incredibly inspiring. And I don't think that they would have come about in quite the same way without the pandemic. And that's not to say that this pandemic has not been devastating and continues to affect so many people's lives. But I think it's one bright spot that we can look at, that we've, exposed this need for really confronting our own biases around racism and our need to dismantle it, and really looking at inequity in all of its forms, not just in the food system, but everywhere. And I think Food Tank's job, or at least part of our job in a very small way, is to amplify those voices that haven't been heard, but that really need to be heard. So I've talked quite a bit. I thank you again for this opportunity, and I'll look forward to any questions that folks may have. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle. I haven't seen any questions come through in the chat yet, so at any point in time, if anybody would like to ask a question, please submit it in the question and answer box on the right side of your screen. If it's not showing, you may need to open the box using the navigation bubbles at the bottom of your screen. So we'll wait just a few moments to see if anybody has any questions. All right, we've got a question from Neil Dahlstrom. He says, thank you for the presentation. What can multinational companies, he works for John Deere, how can they do a better job of further amplifying these voices?
Really great question. And I had the opportunity to visit John Deere a few years ago, and really interesting. Whenever I get the opportunity to visit a big company, I sort of jump on it because I think it's important to see not just the small and medium-sized part of agriculture, but also the big side. And I think a lot of multinationals are sort of taking this on in a big way. I know that Danone, which produces Dannon yogurt, and Mondelez, which is a snack food company, are working to incorporate more equality into their operations. I think there's a real opportunity for a lot of other companies to do that. There needs to be more investment, I think, in BPOC-owned businesses, Black, Indigenous, people of color businesses. A lot of companies are building entrepreneurship programs where they can fund those businesses directly and help them start up, especially during a pandemic when it's hard to get loans, it's hard to get the resources that those businesses need. So there's a lot, I think, that companies are thinking about creatively, but I also think they need to do more because they do have so many resources, and because big food and big ag have not been hit as hard by the pandemic as other businesses. I think, they probably have a bigger responsibility as well to make sure that they're investing in ways to create more equality and equity. I hope that answers your question.
Perfect. We have a question from Bob Riley. Are most of these digital-based markets primarily organic, and can poor people afford it? Regenerative ag is great, costs more, and is hard to make availability to food deserts.
Absolutely, and that's another great question. On the question of the term food deserts, what I've been hearing a lot more, especially from BPOC communities, is the issue of food apartheid. Because if you look at communities, if you call them a desert, that sort of implies that it's not very diverse, that it's devoid of resources. And what a lot of BPOC communities are saying is that they've been, because of a systemic racism, that they've been denied many of the services, like grocery stores or farmers markets or other, ways to access healthy, affordable, nutritious food that other communities, white communities get. So that term food desert, a lot of folks are trying to switch it to food apartheid. So that's just one part of that. But I agree that, the digital platforms for farmers markets, I'm just going to use my farmers market as an example. There is only one certified organic producer at the market I go to. A lot of the other sellers are, trying to grow sustainably. They're using fewer pesticides. They just haven't made the leap to organic certification. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's very expensive for a lot of small farmers. Two, it takes a lot. There's a lot of, regulations that need to be followed. And from a lot of farmers I know, they just want to farm. They just want to work. They want to get, everything growing, and they don't want to take the time because it's very rigorous to follow those standards. So it depends, I think, on the market and where you live. I do think that there is a movement towards more regenerative practices because that's what consumers are craving. Organic sales, even during the pandemic, continue to go up. And there's recently been the implementation of a new organic label called the regenerative organic label to give consumers more information about how their food is grown, how it contributes to sequestering carbon in soils, how it contributes to protecting biodiversity, all of those things that we want all kinds of agriculture, big or small, to do. So, but again, organic is out of reach for so many people. What we need to do is figure out ways to make it possible for more people to afford, the food that, I'm sure many of us on this call like to eat. And we're not quite there yet. I think that requires a lot of a lot of participation and action from the federal government in terms of, what does a living wage look like? What do we want, do we want people working 3 jobs sort of muddling through, or do we want people to have, jobs that they can really count on as careers and where they can raise a family and not have to scramble like so many Americans do?
Awesome, thank you. I apologize, I didn't mute myself. We have some sirens going by our building while you're answering Bob's question. We do have another question as well. Meal delivery services have been amazing during COVID. Where do you see food or meal delivery service growing, and what is sustainable in that market?
Oh my gosh, that's kind of the question of the moment, right? I mean, meal delivery like Instacart or what Amazon has been able to do has made it easier for a lot of folks to get their groceries during this time, but you pay a premium for it, right? And I think a lot of money is being made off these delivery services, and I fear that it's not going to the actual shoppers and the drivers, the people who are putting themselves at risk. So like what I would like to see is I think these delivery systems are only going to grow. They're only, it's going to take a lot, even post-pandemic, to get people back into stores regularly. I think there's still going to be a lot of fear and skepticism and that kind of thing. So I think they're only going to grow. But for them to grow fairly, I think, they probably need more regulation. They can regulate themselves, certainly. But, I think there needs to be a movement, in my opinion, of workers who work for these services to come together and, fight for more protective equipment, fight for probably higher wages. And it also requires us as consumers to recognize that these folks are putting themselves on the front lines. And, during this time, if you have the ability to tip well, because these folks are, again, really putting themselves in danger to make sure that we all can eat.
Absolutely. A follow-up question to that as well is, for these meal delivery services, at what level do they grow to be affordable?
It's a good question. I am not an expert. I read a lot of stuff about this. I don't know. And I think that's a really, again, sort of the question about these things and how big can they get? How many of these delivery services is too many? What should they look like? That kind of thing. I worry about sort of, I think there's been less driving since COVID began, but when you have more of these delivery services, how can we make that more sustainable? I think there are a lot of unanswered questions.
Awesome. Another question from Sarah Wolf. She says, how does the U.S. compare to other developed nations in framing the agricultural practices?
I think it depends. I don't think it's nation versus nation. I think it's community, different communities are doing different things. So, in terms of national food policies, there are countries in Europe who have sort of more comprehensive national food policies. In the United States, our food policy is sort of separated between FDA and USDA. And depending on who's in office, those, policies get made or dismantled in different ways. So I think, because we don't have a national food policy, it's hard to sort of plan, beyond the next 4 years for what the food system and the agriculture system and how farmers will be treated will look like. We do the Farm Bill every 5 years. A lot of folks are calling for, that to be a food and farm bill and make it more comprehensive. So I think, in a lot of ways, European nations, are thinking about these things more comprehensively than we are. But that, they still have their own issues with, things like subsidies and how big is too big and those kinds of questions. So it's, what I'm more interested in and what gives me hope is how community by community, are really dealing with different food issues. That's where you find sort of the inspiration and the ideas that can be scaled up and out and replicated in different ways.
Perfect. A comment from Erica Wickett. Thank you so much, Danielle. I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts on this subject. Food truly is medicine, and I try to educate my family as well as my patients on this matter often. And then we've got another question from Bob Riley.
I'm sorry.
You're okay.
I'm so, it's wonderful that I know she always wanted to be a doctor, so that makes me really happy that she's on this call. So I see her on Facebook with her beautiful family, so that's amazing.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. We've got another question from Bob Riley. Will the mere living wage create equal access to food across the population? Our commodity food system is broken from farm to table, with $2 commercial eggs offered next to $6 organic designer eggs that the commercial goes first.
So Christine, that you call them designer eggs, I think that's a fairly accurate term, Bob. I don't know. I think a living wage would help people in lots of different ways. But again, I think our food system needs to be more fair and equal throughout. And so the fact that, that we have these sort of, really, big leaps in what would be like probably an organic egg. I think that's what Bob means by designer compared to a conventional egg. When you look at the true cost of those things, one of the things that Food Tank has been interested in over the years is this idea of true cost accounting in the food system. So the $2 commodity egg, right, or commercial egg as Bob calls it, it actually, it might appear very cheap at the grocery store, but what is not counted is, the pollution from that particular egg farm, or what kind of margin the farmer gets. It's a very low one. Not all of the feed or, other inputs that go into growing the grain that feeds those chickens. The runoff from chicken farms that, may seep into groundwater, those things aren't accounted into the price that consumers see at the grocery store. If we did count, all of those things and looked at the health benefits of a more sustainably grown, crop or a more sustainably produced egg, then, there'd be, lower healthcare costs or less pollution. Those things aren't accounted for. If we began putting that kind of system in place, that kind of pricing system, we might see folks change their buying practices. We might see governments react differently, but, we're not there yet. So, I think part of the way to get there, though, is, providing folks with the living wage so that they can afford healthier food. But there are a lot of steps that need to happen, in between and after and before for food to really be healthy and accessible for all.
Awesome. That's all of the questions we have in the chat and Q&A at the moment, so we'll wait just a few more minutes to see if any others come through. Bob says he agrees TBL accounting is key.
Great.
So we'll wait just a few more moments to see if any other comments or questions come through, and then we'll wrap up.
These have been great questions. Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed this and hearing from friends old and new, so thank you so much.
Perfect. All right, well, I don't see anything coming through. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you, Danielle, for leading today's discussion. Please feel free to fill out the short pop-up survey giving feedback on today's webinar, and also share your suggestions for future Tartan Talk topics, presenters, and virtual engagement events. We hope to see you all at our next virtual event, which will be Scott's Self-Care. It's a yoga edition with Professor Tara Eaton, and it will take place this Saturday at 10 a.m. You can register on the Monmouth College website. Everybody, please stay healthy and go Scots.
Stay well. Thank you.